My stepmother blocked me from my father's hospital room, so I never got to say goodbye before he died. I didn't scream in the hallway. I didn't fight the nurses. I didn't make a scene outside the ICU. I left, because 3 days earlier, my father had called me and told me exactly what to do. "Don't argue with her, Claire," he said. "Let her think she won." My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 32 years old, and I buried my father 3 weeks ago. It still feels wrong to write that. My dad was the kind of man who seemed too steady to disappear. He built an HVAC business from one truck and a toolbox into a company with 12 vans, contracts across 3 counties, and employees who had been with him long enough to feel like family. He owned the house I grew up in outright, the same house my mother helped choose before she got sick. My parents divorced when I was 11, but they both stayed present in my life. Then my mother died of breast cancer when I was 19, and something in my father went quiet after that. He still worked, still remembered birthdays, still called me every Sunday morning, but he never fully came back from losing her. When I was 22, he remarried. She was 34, he was 51. I tried to accept her. I told myself he deserved companionship. I told myself that if she made him less lonely, I could live with the discomfort. But from the first week she moved into our family home, she made it clear I was not someone she wanted around. She never openly told me I wasn't welcome. Instead, she did what manipulative people often do. She started small. A photograph disappeared from the living room. My mother's dishes were packed away. Little by little, pieces of my mother's presence began vanishing from the house. Dad noticed, but he hated conflict. "She's just trying to make the place feel like home," he told me once. I wanted to say it already was a home, but I didn't. I was young, grieving, and terrified of losing the only parent I had left. For a while, Dad and I stayed close anyway. We had dinner when we could. We went fishing twice a year. He called every Sunday morning without fail. Then the calls got shorter. She needed him for something. Someone was coming over. They were already running late. Dinner became monthly, then every few months, then something he kept apologizing for canceling. She isolated him slowly, with schedules and guilt and perfect timing. 8 months ago, my father was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him maybe a year with treatment, 6 months without it. He chose treatment, but privately he told me, "I have things to sort out first." I thought he meant the business, insurance, accounts, practical things people handle when they know time is running out. Now I know he meant her. I visited as often as I could, driving 4 hours each way. My stepmother hated every visit. She would schedule appointments during the hours I planned to come. She would say he was sleeping. She would tell me he needed peace. Once I arrived with soup made from one of my mother's old recipes, and she met me at the door before I could even knock twice. "He's resting. I can wait. He needs calm, Claire. He's my father, and I'm his wife." That was always her favorite line. 3 weeks ago, Dad took a bad turn and was admitted to the hospital on a Tuesday. I didn't even hear it from her. My aunt called me, voice shaking, and told me he was in the ICU. I asked when it happened. "Hours ago," she said. "I only just found out." I grabbed my keys and drove through the dark with one thought in my head. Just get there. I reached the hospital a little after 11. The ICU hallway was too bright, too quiet, and smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee. I walked straight toward his room. She was standing outside the door, not crying, not shaken, annoyed. "What are you doing here?" "He's my father. I'm here to see him. Visiting hours are over. I drove 4 hours. Then you should have called first." I looked past her at the closed door. "Move." Her face tightened. "Family only right now." "I am family. I'm his wife, I'm his medical proxy, and I'm telling you he needs rest, not stress." The word stress hit harder than I expected, as if I was the danger, as if my father seeing his daughter would harm him. "He might not have until tomorrow," I said. "Don't be dramatic. The doctor said he's stable." I tried to step around her, and she moved directly into my path. A nurse came over, looking between us. "Is everything okay here?" Before I could answer, my stepmother's expression changed. Tears appeared instantly. "I'm just trying to protect my husband," she said, her voice trembling. "He's fragile, and she's upsetting him." The nurse glanced between us, clearly trying to figure out who was telling the truth. Unfortunately, my stepmother had already started crying. I could have demanded a doctor. I could have called security. I could have raised my voice until someone listened. But behind that door was my father, possibly unconscious, possibly already slipping away. I couldn't bear the thought of his last awareness being my voice, breaking apart in a hallway. So I swallowed it. "I'll be back at 8, I said. Visiting hours start at 10. That was when I understood it had never been about rules. It was about control. I left and got a motel room 2 miles away. I sat on the edge of the bed in my clothes all night, staring at my phone. At 6:47 in the morning, my aunt called. My father had passed at 6:12. I never got to say goodbye because my stepmother decided I didn't deserve to. The funeral was 4 days later, and she controlled every detail. She chose the cheapest casket. She picked readings from a religion my father never practiced. She ignored every suggestion from people who had actually known him. The obituary nearly broke me. It listed his accomplishments. It listed his beloved wife. It left out his only child. My aunt threatened to contact the newspaper herself before my stepmother finally agreed to add my name, almost like a correction. Survived by his loving wife and his daughter Claire. It felt like she was trying to erase me the same way she'd spent years trying to erase my mother. At the funeral, she performed beautifully. Black dress, soft voice, perfectly timed tears. People hugged her and told her how strong she was. I stood near the back and let them remember my father, not the version of him she had created for the room. One of Dad's longtime employees hugged me afterward and said, "He talked about you all the time." That sentence nearly finished me, because during the last few years, I had wondered if Dad understood how hard I was trying to stay close to him. Then I remembered the Wednesday call. 3 days before the hospital, Dad had called me in the middle of the afternoon. He never called on Wednesdays, so I answered even though I was working. "Claire," he said, "I need you to listen carefully." His voice was weak but clear. "What's wrong?" "Nothing right now, but there may be soon." I sat down. "I updated my will 6 months ago," he said. I didn't understand why he was telling me that. "Okay. Your stepmother doesn't know." That made me go still. "The version she saw isn't the real one anymore." "Dad, why are you telling me this?" His breathing was heavy for a second, then he said, "Because I know what she's going to do after I'm gone." I told him not to talk like that. He ignored me. "I know exactly who she is, Claire. I didn't want years of fighting, and I thought I had more time. But when the time comes, don't argue with her. Don't react. Show up when you're supposed to. Stay calm, and let the lawyer do the talking." "What did you do?" His voice softened. "Trust me, I took care of things." Those were the last real words my father ever said to me. So after the funeral, when my stepmother started telling relatives that Dad wanted her taken care of, I stayed quiet. When she talked about continuing his legacy, I stayed quiet. When she mentioned future plans for the business like ownership had already transferred, I stayed quiet. A week later, notices for the will reading went out. I received one. My aunt received one. My stepmother's daughter, from her first marriage, received one too, which told me exactly what my stepmother expected. Her daughter had met my father maybe 4 times in 10 years, but apparently my stepmother thought she belonged in that room. The morning of the reading, my aunt and I arrived early at a downtown law office with dark wood walls, glass doors, and leather chairs that looked too expensive to sit in. My stepmother was already there with her daughter, who barely looked up from her phone. My stepmother smiled when she saw me. "I'm surprised you came." I didn't answer. "Your father and I discussed these things years ago," she said. "He wanted me comfortable. I'm sure there's something small for you too. Maybe one of those fishing rods you two wasted time with." My aunt shifted beside me, ready to speak, but I touched her arm under the table. "Not yet." The lawyer my stepmother believed was handling the estate entered and began reading the will she expected. It was dated 4 years earlier, shortly after their wedding. According to that version of the will, virtually everything belonged to her. The house, the company, the investments, and nearly every major asset my father owned. I was left a small cash gift and a few items from my childhood bedroom. My stepmother didn't even try to hide her smile. "Well," she said when the lawyer finished, "I think that settles things. The house obviously stays with me, and I'll be taking over business operations immediately." She started talking about advisors and changes, as if my father's company was a prize she had just won. That was when my aunt spoke. "Actually, there's another document that needs to be reviewed." The room went quiet. Before my stepmother could respond, the door opened and a man in a gray suit stepped inside. He placed a folder on the table. "I'm the attorney of record for Mr. Bennett's most recent will and testament," he said. "The document that was just read has been legally revoked." My stepmother stared at him. "That's impossible." "The valid will was executed 14 months ago and properly filed." "I saw the will." "You saw a previous version." "My husband would have told me." "He was not required to." The new lawyer began reading. "The house was left to me, with my stepmother given 90 days to vacate. The business was left to me, with instructions to keep the current management team in place unless changes became necessary. 70% of the remaining estate went to me. 30% went to my aunt, who had helped care for him during treatment. Then the lawyer reached the final section. My stepmother actually smiled and straightened in her chair, expecting the final section to save her. To my wife, I leave the sum of $1. Even her daughter looked up from her phone. The lawyer continued. As she has already received more than enough from this marriage through unauthorized access to my personal accounts, as documented in Exhibit C. He placed another stack of papers on the table. Bank records, credit card statements, withdrawal histories, notes in my father's handwriting. Nearly $89,000. My stepmother shot to her feet so fast her chair hit the floor behind her. This is fraud. Her face was red, but her voice shook. She pointed at me. You did this. You manipulated him. The lawyer didn't raise his voice. The will was executed 14 months ago. It was witnessed, notarized, supported by a competency evaluation, and accompanied by a video statement from Mr. Bennett explaining his decisions. The room went silent. My stepmother looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time in 10 years, I didn't see contempt on her face. I saw fear. You can't do this, she said. I kept my voice calm. You kept me from saying goodbye to my father. For 10 years, you tried to push me out of his life. Now you're finding out he noticed. She sat down slowly, like the air had left her body. And that was when I understood my father's final plan. He hadn't just protected the estate. He had left her no room to pretend anymore. Fan-ba. For a few seconds after I spoke, nobody in the room said anything. My stepmother remained frozen in her chair, staring at the documents spread across the table, as if they might somehow change if she looked long enough. Her attorney flipped through page after page, searching for a mistake, a loophole, anything that could undo what had just happened. The problem was that my father had spent more than a year making sure there wouldn't be one. Every safeguard my father had prepared was already in place, from witness statements and notarized paperwork to a competency evaluation and a recorded explanation of his decisions. My father had anticipated every argument before it was ever made. Eventually, my stepmother's attorney closed the folder and looked at her with the expression of a man who knew he was carrying bad news. I'll need time to review everything. That was lawyer language for, this isn't looking good. Her daughter finally put her phone away. Mom, what's going on? My stepmother ignored her. For the first time since I'd known her, she genuinely seemed lost. The meeting ended shortly afterward. She left without another word, her daughter hurrying behind her. A few minutes later, only my aunt, my father's attorney, and I remained in the room. The attorney gathered his papers before looking directly at me. Your father loved you very much. I thought I was prepared for anything after the reading. I wasn't prepared for that. He talked about you constantly, the attorney continued. Every meeting eventually came back to you. Making sure you were protected was his priority. I looked down at the table because suddenly I couldn't trust myself to speak. Before we left, the attorney handed me a sealed envelope. My name was written on the front in my father's handwriting. He wanted you to have this afterward. I slipped it into my purse without opening it. I wasn't ready. The truth was that I was barely holding myself together already. Outside, my aunt and I stood on the sidewalk for a minute, watching traffic move through the city as if nothing had happened. What are you thinking? She asked. I let out a small laugh. Honestly, I think I'm still trying to process that Dad saw everything. She nodded immediately. Neither of us was talking about the money. We were talking about all the years before this. The canceled visits, the manipulation, the distance. For years, I'd wondered whether my father understood what was happening around him. Now I had my answer. 2 days later, my stepmother officially challenged the will. That didn't surprise anyone. The attorney had practically predicted it before we left the conference room. What surprised me was how quickly she started trying to control the narrative. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly began calling. Old family friends started asking strange questions. One cousin messaged me asking whether it was true that I'd pressured my father into changing his will while he was dying. Apparently, my stepmother was telling everyone the same story. According to her version, I had manipulated a vulnerable man. I had stolen her future. I had turned him against his own wife. The accusations would have been laughable if they weren't so insulting. At first, I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to call every relative individually and explain exactly what happened. Then I realized something. Anyone willing to believe her without hearing my side was never going to be convinced by a phone call anyway. So I stopped chasing rumors. The facts would eventually catch up. A few days later, one of my father's oldest friends called me. His name was Richard. He and Dad had played poker together for more than 20 years. After offering condolences, he got quiet for a second. Then he said, "Your father told me about this a long time ago." That caught my attention immediately. What do you mean? He didn't give details, but he told me he'd finally stopped making excuses for her. I leaned back in my chair. Richard continued. He said he spent years hoping things would improve. Eventually, he accepted they weren't going to. Hearing that hurt more than I expected, because it meant my father had been carrying that realization alone. Before hanging up, Richard paused. He talked about you every chance he got, he said quietly. Honestly, I don't think he ever stopped worrying about you. After the call ended, I sat there staring at my phone for several minutes. The inheritance, the house, and the business all mattered, but hearing that mattered more. A week later, my stepmother's legal challenge started falling apart. Her attorney demanded medical records, arguing that cancer had affected my father's judgment. Unfortunately for them, my father had already anticipated that argument too. The same week he signed the will, he had undergone a formal cognitive evaluation. The results showed he was completely competent. That particular argument died immediately. Then came the next strategy. Her daughter started texting me. The first message arrived late one evening. My mom is going to lose everything because of you. A second followed. How do you sleep at night knowing you're throwing a widow out of her home? Then a third. She took care of your father for years. This is cruel. I read them twice before putting my phone down. The messages sounded less like her daughter and more like my stepmother speaking through someone else. For a few minutes, I considered responding. Eventually, I sent one sentence. Please don't contact me again. To her credit, she didn't. At least not directly. The following week, I received a handwritten letter from my stepmother. No lawyer. No legal language. Just her. I almost threw it away unopened. Curiosity won. The first page tried to sound reasonable. The second page turned emotional. By the third page, the real purpose became obvious. She wanted a deal. Specifically, she wanted the house. According to her proposal, I could keep the business if I allowed her to remain in the property permanently. I actually laughed when I read that. The house my mother helped choose. The house my father specifically ordered her to leave. The house she believed she could negotiate back through guilt. The final paragraph was the most unbelievable part. She wrote that allowing her to stay would be the Christian thing to do. I read that sentence 3 times. This was the same woman who blocked me from seeing my father before he died. The same woman who tried to remove me from his obituary. The same woman actively challenging his final wishes. And somehow she was lecturing me about forgiveness. I folded the letter and called my attorney. What would you like to do? He asked. I thought about Exhibit C, $89,000. Years of withdrawals. Years of hidden transfers. Years of taking money she wasn't entitled to. Move forward, I said. With the recovery action? Yes. If she wanted to keep fighting, that was her choice. But she wasn't going to do it without consequences. The weeks that followed became increasingly chaotic. First, she changed the locks on the house. That lasted less than 24 hours. My attorney immediately informed her that the property belonged to the estate and that she had no authority to deny access. The locks were changed back. A few days later, she tried selling several of my father's tools from the garage. Fortunately, a neighbor recognized them and called me before the sale happened. Those tools were estate property. A police report was filed. The tools stayed exactly where they were. Most people would have taken those setbacks as a warning. My stepmother doubled down instead. Then she crossed a line I never expected. One morning, human resources at my company requested a meeting. The moment I saw the email, something felt wrong. When I walked into the conference room, my manager and an HR representative were already waiting. Both looked uncomfortable. We received a complaint, the HR representative said. I already knew who had filed it. According to the complaint, I had financially exploited my dying father. According to the complaint, I was under investigation. According to the complaint, the inheritance itself was fraudulent. Every accusation traced back to my stepmother. Fortunately, documentation exists for a reason. Once HR reviewed the court filings and estate records, the complaint collapsed almost immediately. The meeting was over within minutes. My job was never actually at risk. Still, I sat at my desk afterward feeling angrier than I had since the hospital, because by then it wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't about the house. It wasn't even about the will. She wanted revenge, and she was becoming reckless trying to get it. A few days later, my attorney called again. The 90-day deadline is approaching. I glanced at the calendar. 3 weeks remained. Do you think she'll leave? He laughed. No. Honestly, neither did I. What happens if she stays? The same thing that happens to anyone who ignores a court order. I already knew the answer before he said it. Eviction. The countdown had started. And whether my stepmother accepted it or not, she was running out of time. Fan ba chun ba. The 90-day deadline came and went. My stepmother didn't leave. By then, I wasn't surprised. For 3 months, she had ignored legal notices, ignored court filings, ignored every sign that the fight was over. Somewhere along the way, she convinced herself that refusing to accept reality would somehow change it. It didn't. On the morning of day 91, my attorney called. "It's happening today." I knew exactly what he meant. The eviction order had been approved, and the sheriff's department would be enforcing it. Part of me wanted to be there. After everything she had done, after all the years of manipulation, after the hospital, the funeral, the lies, there was a part of me that wanted to watch the moment she finally faced consequences. But my attorney advised against it. And honestly, he was right. Being there wouldn't bring my father back. It wouldn't give me the goodbye I lost. It wouldn't heal anything. So I stayed home. My aunt went instead. Around noon, my phone rang. The moment I answered, I could hear raised voices in the background. My aunt sighed. "Well, it's finally over." I sat down slowly. "What happened?" Exactly what you'd expect. Apparently, my stepmother spent the better part of an hour arguing with deputies, insisting they were helping a criminal steal from a widow. When that didn't work, she accused the court of corruption. When that didn't work, she accused me of manipulating everyone involved. The deputies listened patiently, but there wasn't much to debate. The court order was valid, and by that point, the process was simply moving forward. She had to leave. At some point, her daughter arrived and tried to join the argument. According to my aunt, that only made the situation louder. One deputy eventually warned her that interfering with enforcement proceedings was a very bad idea. After that, things moved quickly. By late afternoon, my stepmother was gone. She left with whatever she could fit into her vehicle. Everything else remained behind, exactly as the court order required. When the call ended, I sat in silence for a while. I expected to feel victorious. Instead, I mostly felt tired. For months, every conversation, every legal document, every phone call had somehow connected back to this situation. It had consumed so much emotional energy that when it finally ended, all I felt was relief. The fight was over. A couple of weeks later, the court officially dismissed her challenge to the will. The hearing lasted less than 10 minutes. The judge reviewed the competency evaluation, witness statements, notarized paperwork, and my father's recorded explanation before dismissing the challenge. Just like that, the recovery action regarding the missing $89,000 continued separately. Whether we would ever recover the full amount remained uncertain, but the important part wasn't the money anymore. More importantly, everything my father had documented was now part of the official record, where it couldn't be rewritten or erased. A week later, I visited the house alone. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe that's what happens when you're seeing a place through adult eyes instead of childhood memories. The oak tree in the backyard was still there. The porch still creaked. The kitchen still smelled faintly like old wood and sunlight. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The silence hit me immediately. The silence wasn't empty anymore. For the first time in years, it felt peaceful. For the first time in years, the house felt like itself again. I walked through each room slowly. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway. Every corner carried memories. Some made me smile. Some hurt. Most did both. Eventually, I stopped outside my father's office. The door was slightly open. Inside, almost everything looked untouched. His desk, his chair, his shelves, stacks of magazines, old notebooks, family photographs. One picture immediately caught my attention. My parents on their wedding day. My mother's smile practically lit up the frame. The photo had been shoved behind a row of books. I stared at it for a moment before placing it back where it belonged. Front and center. Exactly where my father used to keep it. That small gesture affected me more than I expected. Because standing there, looking around the room, I finally understood something. My stepmother spent years trying to erase pieces of my mother. But my father never forgot. Not once. He carried those memories with him until the end. I sat in his office for nearly an hour, before finally reaching into my bag and pulling out the envelope his attorney had given me after the will reading. I had been carrying it around for weeks. Part of me hadn't opened it because I wasn't ready. Part of me didn't want the last unread words from my father to disappear, but now felt right, so I opened it. The moment I saw his handwriting, my chest tightened. The letter wasn't long. It didn't need to be. He told me he loved me. He told me he was sorry for the pain I'd experienced. He told me none of what happened was my fault. Then I reached the paragraph that finally broke me. Claire, if you're reading this, then I wasn't able to tell you everything myself. There is one thing I need you to know. You never failed me, Claire. I knew how hard you fought to stay in my life. I saw every visit, every phone call, every effort you made when it would have been easier to walk away. If you weren't beside my bed at the end, it wasn't your fault. I knew you were coming. and I never doubted that for a second. Someone else made that decision for both of us. Please don't carry that burden for the rest of your life. You were always my daughter. You were always enough. And I was always proud of you. I had to set the letter down for a minute and collect myself before continuing. For weeks, I'd been carrying a question I couldn't escape. Did he think I gave up on him? Did he believe I stopped trying? Did he die wondering where I was? That letter answered all of it. The guilt I'd been dragging around since the hospital finally loosened its grip. Not completely. Grief doesn't disappear because someone writes the right words. But it got lighter. A lot lighter. Life slowly settled after that. The business remained stable. My father's management team continued doing what they had always done, and I made it clear that I wasn't interested in sweeping changes. He built something that supported dozens of families, and I wanted to protect it, not reinvent it. My aunt and I grew closer too. We started having dinner together every few weeks. Most of the time we talked about my father. Not the legal battles, not the inheritance. Him, the funny stories, the embarrassing stories, the stories that never make it into obituaries. Those became my favorites. People still ask me whether I feel guilty about what happened to my stepmother. The answer is no. I don't celebrate what happened to her. I don't enjoy seeing anyone lose everything. But consequences are not cruelty. For years, she made choices believing she would never have to answer for them. She was wrong. The only person I ever worried about was my father. Whether I could have done more, whether I should have pushed harder, whether I should have fought back sooner. Then I remember that Wednesday phone call, the calm certainty in his voice, the way he already seemed at peace with the decision he'd made. My father spent his final months making sure the people he loved would be protected. That was his last act as a father. Looking back, the most valuable thing my father left me had nothing to do with money or property. What mattered most was the reassurance that he understood me, the certainty that he never doubted my love for him, and the knowledge that our relationship had never been as broken as I feared. My stepmother will probably tell a different version of this story for the rest of her life. In her version, she'll be the victim. In her version, she was cheated out of what she deserved. That's her choice. She can keep that story. I don't need it. I have the house where my parents built a life together. I have the company my father spent 30 years creating. I have the memories nobody can take away. And most importantly, I have a letter that answered the question that haunted me after he died. For weeks after he died, I thought my greatest regret would always be that I never got to say goodbye. Then I realized something. My father had already said goodbye to me. The only thing I never got was the chance to say it back. I was never abandoned. And despite everything my stepmother tried to take from us, she never succeeded in taking away the one thing that mattered most. My father knew I loved him, and I knew he loved me.